Andrew is a Gold Walkley Award winning photojournalist and also now essayist and reporter, who I used to work alongside at the Sydney Morning Herald, but that feels like a long time ago now, and who just this year has again had recognition from the profession, winning the Freelancer of the Year for a couple of essays, including one for the Monthly, which was on the war crimes of Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan, and we'll get onto that. Andrew has been in Afghanistan since 2013, and so not all the time, but most of that time. I think you were here also for the Black Summer at the last year.
Yeah, that was my holiday.
Hey?
That was meant to be my holiday.
Yeah. Still incredible work. But most recently, and the reason why in particular I got in touch with Andrew and thought that his story today would be interesting and inspiring for you students is because Andrew was one of the few Western journalists who decided to remain in Kabul after the fall of the city to the Taliban, and you would have seen Andrew on Four Corners literally as the Taliban were advancing on the airport. What's it called, that airport again?
Hamid Karzai International Airport.
Yeah, and incredible footage actually of showing you, Andrew, exhausted trying to get some of your colleagues and friends from Afghanistan out of the country that night. But look, we'll get to that. If I can just say, could you please all welcome, we can't really do anything online, it's also sterile, but nonetheless, if you could please welcome Andrew. And Andrew, can I just ask the same question that we ask everyone who appears to these sessions? How and why did you become a journalist?
I kind of fell into it, to be honest. Long story short, I was at the uni in New South Wales studying design after I left school, and I had a couple of uncles who were photographers at the time, one of whom gave me an old camera of his, and they were kind of my cool uncles, you know, the ones I looked up to and admired and tried to emulate to some degree, and so I thought, while I'm studying design, I'll try and get into this the photography elective at COFA, and because of the way they enrolled, that didn't happen. So I dropped out, and I spent a year traveling around the country in an old van with the camera my uncle had given me, and enjoyed just, you know, taking very basic photos documenting the trip of my friends and the places we went. And while I was away, I thought, well, why don't I study photography? So I went into TAFE down the road from you guys, and studied photography there. But I still didn't really know what kind of photography I wanted to get into, and it just so happened that the liquor store where I was working at the time, part-time, was also a regular stop off for a photo editor at the Financial Review at the time. And he was very encouraging of me to always bring in rolls of film for me to use, and you know, talk about his photos on the front page. And he eventually gave me some work experience at the Fin. Paddy, you might remember Greg Newington.
Yeah,
is his name.
No, I don't know. I didn't work with him.
And
but I know his name.
You don't? No? Okay. Yeah. And from there, I just fell in with a bunch of kind of ratbag photographers at the Fin Review and the Sydney Morning Herald, who Sydney Morning Herald was 2 levels up from the Fin Review at the time, and it's where, you know, really early on, when I was working there in like 2004 and 5 and 6 maybe, where film was being processed. We'd come back from shoots and we'd go up there and process our film, and that's where a lot of these the photographers, the darkroom, yeah, a lot of the photographers who I am still very close to today, where I met them and it sort of, you know, fell in under their wing, and was not only influenced by their photography, but just by their worldview and the music they listened to and the writers they read and things. And so it really went from there. I could probably just as easily have ended up in fashion photography or some other kind of commercial photography. Fortunately for me, I didn't, and it kind of went from there. And I continued working as a photographer at Fairfax until 2010, when I left and went freelance, and from there went to New York, spent a couple of years there, and then ended up in Afghanistan. That's yeah, sort of slowly went from, you know, a very novice photographer to a you know, a photojournalist, I suppose you'd say, and now, you know, I sort of have a bit of a balance between writing and photography, which is probably more in favor of writing these days, actually.
And what did you ever have you know, an ambition to go to a war zone, to be a war correspondent, like to I mean, what drew you to Afghanistan?
Again, it was really it was somewhat by chance. I mean, I think like everyone in of our kind of generation, Paddy, and probably to a slightly lesser extent for the students, Afghanistan was very present in the world's consciousness after 2001, and so I took a, you know, passing interest to begin with, and then I think as I became more aware civilly and socially, after hanging out with these photographers in Sydney, my interest became more attuned, and eventually I had the chance to, I was actually, it was actually another friend from the Fin Review who had since left the Fin Review, who asked me if I knew any photographers in Afghanistan that she could work with. She wanted to come here to write a story about the Afghan cricket team who was about to embark on a trip to Australia for their first Cricket World Cup. And I sort of, without thinking about it, said, "Oh, I'll come." And I did, and we both had 1-month visas, which we extended and extended and extended until we couldn't extend them anymore. And by the time that 3-month period came to an end, I still wasn't ready to leave. So I just, I went home, packed up a few things and moved back indefinitely.
Did you fall in love with the place, or fall in love with the people, or fall in love?
Probably all of the above. I mean, I think probably most importantly, for the first time, I really found meaning in my work, and in photography. In fact, for the first time, I worked out how to tell. I think I worked out how to tell stories through photography, and strangely enough, and we talked about this in the lead up to this, Paddy. I think it was partly due to Instagram, which gave me the autonomy to not only produce my own photos, but present them in a way that I wanted to. And I found that in Afghanistan, unlike anywhere else I'd been before, I found it very hard to point my camera in any direction that didn't tell some, fascinating story with that incorporated,
Oh no.
Sorry, guys, I don't know how much you missed there, but
you found it very hard to point your camera in any direction that.
Yeah, that didn't incorporate, didn't incorporate like years of history and modern politics and the very compelling notions of life and death, and they're very. It's probably I mean, I guess these are the things that have compelled photographers and writers to conflict zones for years, but I mean, it wasn't even necessarily the combat and the fighting itself that I was drawn to as much as it was the living on the edge of that. And I just like I said, like nowhere else I'd experienced before, I found photography to be photography with incorporation of words to be a medium which suited it, especially given partly also due to the fact that Afghanistan is such an incredibly spectacular and photogenic place. So all these things kind of came together, and I also, I definitely fell in love with the country itself, and the people are as warm as this can be, and I made a good sort of small group of friends, and there's a good community of foreigners here who with whom you become close, even if you're not close friends. There's a relationship that you can nurture in a place like this, which is more difficult outside. I mean, it's like village life here for foreigners, or for the foreigners that maintain a kind of expat community to an extent. So everyone knows everyone's business, and there's good and bad with that, of course, but generally the community is very close, and then of course outside that the locals themselves, with whom we obviously mix as well, but are incredibly warm and a good group of people to live amongst.
So can you tell us, Andrew, what you have to do to stay safe? Like, you're not embedded with the Australian military. You're freelancing, right? So you've got to look after yourself. What do you do to stay safe? Are you safe now? And what do you have to do to? Can you talk us through like your situation? Where are you in Kabul? Do you have to watch? Are you being watched or followed, do you think, etc., etc.?
I mean, it's changed a little bit over the years, and the type of reporting that's been done over the last 20 years has changed as well, where as you alluded, in the first up until 2014, a lot of the reporting that was done here focused on the international military involvement, and a lot of the vast majority of the photographs that I remember seeing, and which kind of painted the picture that I knew Afghanistan to be, in that time was painted by and large by photographers who were spending time embedded with the international military coalition. By the time I arrived, there was the international combat mission had wound down significantly. It was probably it had like 10% the numbers that it had in 2010 by 2014, and the access to international military wasn't there either. I mean, this is becoming an increasingly unpopular war outside Afghanistan politically, so there was less incentive for the international forces to give access to journalists, and the international forces simply weren't doing as much as they were in the past. They were sort of training and supporting things that weren't as compelling for journalists to cover. So it happened quite naturally that I sort of just fell into the community in Kabul, and lived a normal kind of expat life, I guess. I rented a room in a share house with a bunch of other journalists and aid workers and things, and I have lived in different iterations of that since. But in terms of security, it's I mean, as a freelancer, it's been more or less entirely up to me to navigate that. And again, that's changed over the years as well, where in 2014, I would, relatively confidently walk around, walk long distances around Kabul, to get from A to B. Over the years, that has decreased to almost zero. So there's very little sort of walking the streets or leisure activities or just normal kind of urban life that we would all take for granted in most other parts of the world. Strangely enough, that's changed a little bit in the last 2 months since the Taliban took power. There is, the risk of crime, threat of petty crime on the streets in Kabul has decreased dramatically because of the fear factor of being caught by the Taliban, and so that has actually opened streets up somewhat to me, and to a lot of people. Having said that, a lot of people are also have good reason to be too afraid to walk the streets because of their perceived perceived transgressions they've made in the past by whether it be working for the government or the former security services or whatnot.
In the Four Corners, you said that, and I'll throw over to the students' questions in a sec, but in the Four Corners, you said you were taking a gamble by saying that you would have some degree of protection by virtue of being a foreign journalist. Do you think that's the case? Do you think that you have got a degree of protection or immunity to what's going on?
Yeah, for sure. There's no guarantees, but it's definitely not going to do the Taliban any favors to be seen to be harming a foreigner of any kind when they're trying so desperately hard to acquire international diplomatic recognition. Whereas, and this is the case, worldwide to a large extent for international, certainly Western white journalists. We do have some level of immunity to, in comparison to what local journalists face, who are just not going to receive the same level of support nor the same international outrage should anything happen to them, which is, it's a really it's really difficult to reconcile. I mean, there's so many. I mean, not only the journalists who are here, I mean, or just about, I don't know, like 99% of my journalist friends that I've met over my time here have left now. I mean, they're not, not only are they being treated poorly, those who remained, I mean, most of them have left because they don't feel safe enough, and yet I'm still here reporting in their country. So it's pretty hard to stomach that one, and to look my friends who are in camps in military bases in the US or Germany or Doha or Qatar at the moment, waiting to be resettled elsewhere with their families.
And have you been in any way threatened, or do you feel like you are being monitored, or is it risky for you? Is your internet access free? Is your communication still open?
Yeah, I mean, it's strangely enough, there's been very little interruption to communications, electricity to this point, although we have no power at the moment. But services to an extent have continued, and as far as monitoring goes, I mean, you can never be entirely sure, but my sense is that the Taliban are not, at this stage anyway, sophisticated enough to be able to be doing things like tapping phones or doing serious sort of surveillance and things. Having said that, I think it's more it's kind of that they're putting restrictions on what you can do above board at the moment. So if you pretty much to talk to any officials or to travel outside of Kabul, you need to get the permission of the authorities in that area, or in the organization or the ministry that you want to talk with, and it's tightening up day by day for sure. And yeah, certainly, like with any aspect of life in Afghanistan these days that the Taliban would prefer the international community did not see, because it portrays them in a bad light. The Taliban are going to efforts to prevent you from being able to depict it. I mean, from the airport, scenes at the airport in the early days of the takeover, to more recently protests, and even depictions of the economic problems at the moment. The Taliban will, if they see you, they will stop you from photographing it or from talking to people on those issues. And often, if it's in an environment like a protest or a chaotic one like at the airport, they'll do it violently.
Okay, last question from me. This is an investigative journalism class. To me, that what you're doing is like the definition of investigative journalism, in that you're telling the truth about what is happening under a repressive regime, and where the rest of much of the rest of the media has departed. Is that the way you feel about it? Do you feel that you're being investigative in your reporting? Both written reporting and as a photojournalist?
I suppose so. Yeah, I mean, to an extent, all journalism is investigative, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely I mean, I think it's inherent in anyone that probably gets into, at least in the majority of people that get into journalism, you want to tell stories that other people want to keep from being told. And they're certainly the ones that I'm drawn to more than others. And I suppose it's maybe it's from my years, battling with public relations people at big, powerful companies while I was working at the Financial Review newspaper, that sort of turned me against the PR world, and trying to pull back the covers on the kind of issues that they're trying to push out to the world, and which our governments and the spin doctors are trying to, the way that they're trying to portray themselves, and which is often in contradiction to the reality. And that's definitely something that I have, it's something that has, I suppose, become a bit of a theme in my reporting here. More specifically, the issue of civilian casualties, and particularly civilian casualties of international military action, which, it's a bit of an uphill battle going up against the US military, who, spend billions of dollars a year pushing out their own portrayal of what it is they do. And, I'm probably part of a small group of journalists here who have been chasing those kind of angles for the past few years. And, I'm under no illusions that it as to whether or not it changes things. But I think the more concentration that is, or the more focus that is concentrated on the issue by the more people who choose to focus on that issue, and the more it becomes apparent in the discourse about war and about Afghanistan and about international military involvement abroad, the more pressure, I suppose, that can be imposed to affect change. And I think it does. I think the way the American military speaks these days about these issues, about they obviously feel the pressure to at least be seen to be doing something to counteract the kind of issues that I've tried to report on. And I suppose I'd have to be very cynical to think that that there wasn't some level of genuine belief or hope that the mistakes or the behaviour that leads to these kind of civilian casualty incidents is actually, or efforts are actually made to change them, rather than just the rhetoric around them.
Well, I'd love to ask you about the Kunduz strike and how you came to be the first journalist there, but I'll throw it over to the students. Are there any questions from the students? Wally.
Hi, how are you? Had two questions. One, just not a question yet. I'm from Nangarhar, Afghanistan.
Okay.
And, yeah, my parents are still in Kabul. I won't ask where you live, but I'm quite familiar there as well.
I'm in Shari now.
Shari now?
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, my parents are out in Azan Khimat. So.
Okay.
There's been some images circulating of local journalists getting beaten and stuff like that recently. Does that make you concerned? And is there a way out right now if you wanted to? Because I know Kabul Airport, there's still not really open yet. There were a few flights. And also, is there a semblance of normality coming back to like the economy? And it's been pretty stagnant recently.
For the economy, no, it's really grim, and I think it's only going to get worse. I mean, the prices of basic foodstuffs are increasing. and the scarcity of cash has been great for 8 weeks now. Government workers haven't been paid their salaries. I mean, they hadn't been paid salaries 2 months before the collapse of the government, and now it's 4 months in total. And just in general, I mean, there's any investment has disappeared. All the international community and the investment and jobs and things that came with their presence here has evaporated. It's really bleak, I think. And coming into winter, it's going to be, it's very bleak. I'm sorry to say. About risk to myself. I mean, I don't think I would probably get the same treatment as the journalists that you referred to and whom I've met, who were taken in off the street while covering a couple of different protests soon after the takeover. And they were beaten unconscious. And I don't mean they were made unconscious by beatings to the head, but they became unconscious because of the pain. And they were all, some of you may have seen photos of them with the welts and bruises on their back and the back of their legs from being beaten with hoses and electrical cables. And really pretty brutal stuff. And not only that, they've been threatened in their offices and things of making sure they don't step out of line. Getting out of the country, there are actually international flights now to Pakistan, and that might be it actually. But there are some international flights, yeah. So it's less of a problem if, of course, if you have a passport, visas, and can afford to get out.
Thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you for chatting with us, Andrew. I also just wanted to say, so as time passes, are you worried that the Afghan crisis will fall out of the news cycle, that the Taliban's hold will strengthen almost unnoticed, it will just go in time and we'll just kind of forget about it in the West?
I think that's everyone's fear, and it's almost inevitable. You can really you can kind of anticipate the news cycle to an extent, anywhere in the world, and in I think it was about 12 or 13 days, maybe 2 weeks after the collapse of Kabul, Afghanistan was the lead story on the BBC, which I just use that as an example because I listen to it each morning. But and then slowly it's fallen away, and that's to be expected. I mean, it's not it's both the fault of the media, but also the interest levels and the appetites of the news consuming public. I suppose that it's no surprise that where a vision or images of people falling off a American military aircraft while trying to escape the country is going to make the front page, and tens of or hundreds of thousands of Afghans not being able to feed themselves on a daily basis is not. We fall into the same kind of it's supply and demand. It depends on what the news consuming public wants, and to a degree what sells, and also just what is interesting to read about and to learn about. And I suppose that's the job of a good journalist, to find a way into that very hard to communicate story of hundreds of thousands of people being without food, and trying to get that on the front page. And look, to answer your question, it's I think it's a big concern for everyone, and also because there's a belief that the Taliban will capitalize when that happens, and when the world looks away, that they will start, really cracking down and imposing their the rules and regulations for which they're known. So yeah, I think that's I think it's something that all journalists here are aware of. It's also really hard. I mean, I think for me, as someone who has lived here and doesn't sort of just come in and come out after they've reported their stories, who to an extent takes on a bit of the emotion, whether it's pain or joy of the country when there is reason for such emotions to come out. I mean, the past 2 months and watching as the Taliban sort of slowly cracks down, I also lose hope for the country, and I worry that will that I will become jaded by it, and that I will give up on the country, and as I think the rest of the world likely will, that once the Taliban really consolidate their power, there's going to be no hope left, or no reason to keep fighting for the people who need to be fought for. And I guess it's something that I'm conscious of, and am a little bit concerned about how I'll respond in the weeks, months, years to come.
I've got a couple of more hands up. Andrew, can you take a couple more?
Yeah, sure.
Mohammed.
Oh, hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Really appreciate that you're trying to show another side to the Afghanistan story. Now, the following question, having a look at some of your photos, they're absolutely storytelling, and they tell amazing stories having a look at them. I was just wondering, you don't have to answer the question if you don't want to, but how difficult is it to take some of those shots, and what are the emotions that are going through your mind when you do take those shots?
What kind of photos are you talking about? Are you talking about like ones where there's a lot of like tense, violent moments, or more personal, emotional, intimate
I saw
moments?
more the personal, emotional ones where there was people who didn't have many things and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose, and this kind of goes for across the board with anything I'm pointing a camera at. I think in those moments, to an extent, you're able to concentrate or look at it as the carrying out of my work, using the tool to conduct my work, and that definitely removes some of the sort of interpersonal connectedness to what's going on in front of the camera, and insulates me, I think, a bit. I'm focused on what I'm doing rather than what I'm doing, and portraying that for others to see, rather than my own personal response to what's happening in front of me. Obviously, that's there is insulation, but it's not completely immunizing. So to answer your question, I don't know. I just I guess you try to look at it as much as possible as a professional, rather than I guess you try to balance the way you view it between being a professional and doing your job and as a human being. And, you know, that's important as well, getting that balance right. So, the interaction you're having with the people in the scene that you're depicting are not, you know, don't see you as, you know, some robot who, you know, just sent to, you know, take their pictures away from them, but as someone who is, you know, affected to an extent, but not to the extent that you can't do your job. So yeah, it's a good question. I don't even know if I can really answer it.
Lucinda.
As everybody said, thanks so much for speaking to us, Andrew. This question's a bit of a two-pronged question, and I assume your answer to it has changed a bit in the current climate, but I'm curious about how you make sure that you're documenting everything that kind of needs to be documented and that people are being voiced without taking away work or agency from local photographers and journalists. And kind of on that, are you particularly selective in who you earn an income from in terms of Western publications, or will you generally give work to anybody who's willing to give a voice to Afghanistan?
Yeah, good question. I mean, sadly, there are so few Afghan photographers left here now. Those who I used to be friends with, a handful of them who were kind of freelancers and who I could kind of have some sort of influence with or provide some kind of assistance with. They've all left, they've all gone, and are in Europe now for the most part. There have, however, been a number of quite like young Iranian photographers who have come in the last 2 months, few of whom are getting any commissions from, you know, big international publications, and who I've on a couple of occasions tried to introduce to publications who I knew needed photographers. Because of the sort of unknown to an extent circumstances at the moment, the two publications I tried to introduce them to were not taking work from freelancers at the time, and they were waiting for their own staff photographers to fly into the country, ostensibly because they didn't want to put freelancers who were not insured or had the appropriate training in such environments at risk. But yeah, it's a good question, and unfortunately one that is almost redundant now because of, I mean, I actually don't know if there's one Afghan photographer who's still working at AFP. I don't know of any others. So it's pretty tragic, really, that all these photographers who have learnt their trade in the last 20 years and now can't even be here to depict this, you know, really important time of transition in the country's history. And your second question, remind me?
I guess it's also a little bit redundant now too, but just in terms of making an income from Western publications, are you quite happy to give work to any publication that will support Afghanistan? Or
look, I think it depends on the story, and I mean, it's definitely something that I consider. I mean, I've regretted on a couple of occasions having stories published by certain publications once, you know, and regardless of how many protections you try to put in place, at the end of the day, you're not the one that pushes the publish button. And you know, the same goes for the subjects of the stories we tell. You know, you can give them all the assurances in the world, or, you know, despite their concerns about being quoted out of context and things. At the end of the day, the power lies, well, first with me, and then my editors. Certainly, I've had one example that comes to mind was the Daily Mail, which is probably no surprise. I mean, they're known for sensationalizing pretty heavily, and they once asked if they could republish a story I'd written. And as a freelancer, it's hard to say no to making some extra cash for not a lot of extra work, but I did regret it with them. They just they turned this story into, or the way they presented this story with the headlines and the sort of multiple subheadings that they use. I mean, they really fell back on a lot of the kind of tropes and stereotypes that pretty old-fashioned in this day and age. So yeah, it's a consideration, and again, it's a bit of a balancing act between needing to keep cash flowing in and wanting to maintain your integrity.
I've got one last question, Andrew, from Elena, and then I'll ask one, and then we could let you go if that's. And I hope,
yeah, no worries.
As long as your dog's all right. Elena.
Dog's all right.
Hello.
Cat might not be.
Sorry. Hello. You mentioned quite a few journalists have left. So I guess I wanted to ask you, what drives you personally as a journalist to report and to keep reporting and to keep capturing moments and telling stories?
Oh, good question. I think so. Before Kabul fell to the Taliban, I was in France for a friend's wedding, and I had planned to stay there for a little while longer to have some time out. And then as it became increasingly clear that the Taliban were, gonna take Kabul sort of any day, I had to decide, well, do I want to miss this? Do I want to be there and potentially get stuck in Kabul with a lot of uncertainty ahead, or am I like, what's the point? Why should I take the risk? And in the end, it was I got back the day before Kabul fell, and I think and everyone asked me why I would, and I think there's a number of answers to the question. Partly, it's that journalistic instinct to run towards the burning house rather than away from it. But in this case, it was actually, I think, the overwhelming reason for me to return was more to do with the feeling that I had of being part of the community here, rather than being a journalist here that drew me back. I wanted to be with the people who had experienced, or who live here and who had moved here, and with whom I had experienced some pretty spectacular highs and lows in recent years or months. And also, I mean, I live here. It's my home, and it's I have a house and I have a dog, obviously, and I didn't want to be away from them, from all these things at the time. So there was a bit of a sense of solidarity in it. And then, of course, there's that professional calling. And I guess again, it goes back to the question Mohammed asked about, balancing the personal and the professional. And that, that's been part of the reason I've stayed here all along, because I have found a nice balance between the personal and the professional here, and that follows through to why I'm still here now, and telling and trying to tell stories. And I mean, it also happens that, I mean, the stories that anyone who was here on the days of the takeover and those that followed are just, you know, incredible. Like there's just tens of thousands of stories to tell, and I'm currently trying to dig into a handful of those for a book, actually, about the fall of Kabul. So that has certainly given me professional reason to be here, and I don't think that'll ever really dissipate going forward into the future. What will be my my tolerance for watching a country go downhill, and which is unfortunately the way I kind of see it going, and whether I can tolerate witnessing that as someone who has called the place home for nearly 8 years now.
If I could just ask finally about the Australia's own contribution in Afghanistan, now tarnished by war crime allegations and prosecutions that are sort of ongoing, and that you've reported on. How does that change your view of I mean, as an Australian, how does that make you feel, and how does that change your view of, you know, the contribution that Australia's made there? Will there be any lasting positive legacy at all?
Gosh, I mean, it's pretty hard to for any legacy to usurp such, you know, spectacular allegations, isn't it? And I mean, it's important to remember that although the crimes do seem to have been, or the alleged crimes do seem to have been pretty widespread and carried out by, you know, dozens of servicemen and women. In fact, I don't know if there were any women accused of them, but you know, they were still a very small minority, and I have no doubt that the majority of soldiers who came here were doing so with good intentions. Whether they will be remembered, you know, in fact, I think they will be, and most people I spoke to, even in Uruzgan, had many of them did have good, fond memories of interactions with Australian soldiers. It was the special forces that most of them spoke, you know, extremely critically of. These what they call them, the devils with beards. The SAS and the commandos, who will not be missed in Uruzgan. And I mean, it surprises me, actually, since the Taliban have come to Kabul, and, you know, I cross paths with them in the street every day, and have met a few Uruzganis and a few handfuls of others from Helmand and Kandahar, where the Australians operated, or the Australian Special Forces operated. And apart from one Talib who told me if it wasn't for the orders his commander had given him, he'd shoot me on the spot, most of them are pretty, I don't know, forgiving, or at least they can see or they make a distinction between me and the Australian Special Forces, with whom they had very different interactions. Yeah, I think it'll be hard for Australia's legacy to get past the allegations that came out in the Brereton report.
Andrew, thanks so much for your time. I can't, yeah, you certainly inspire me. I was texting you furiously when I watched the Four Corners. I was sort of beside myself with worry for you, and admire you as a bloody heroic journalist to stay. And geez, that will be a fantastic book when it comes out. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paddy. Thanks, Paddy. Thanks, everyone.